Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us again, Zoe. It's great to see you.
And yourself, Gabby, thank you very much for having me.
It's been a while. I don't know when we last did one of these.
Oh, I think the last 3 years seem to be a bit of a blur. But
Just
always a pleasure, always a pleasure.
it is. And we're gonna start off with well, it does change the dental landscape. So we'll start with the classic question, which is, what does that look like right now?
Changeable. Good and bad, Gabby, I've got to say. I mean, you probably know I've been working in dentistry from the age of 16. So I've sort of been around dentistry, I think 35 plus years now, showing my age. Yeah, and it's quite a sad landscape, if I'm honest. There's a lot of optimism out there, but also there's a lot of sadness because there's that balancing act of practices making difficult calls and having to make decisions about where they fit within dentistry. So we're finding actually the landscape is quite changeable. People are either sitting around waiting for what's coming next after a very turbulent 3 years working with the NHS practices. So yeah, there's a lot of activity at the moment. Us as a business, we are doing lots of NHS conversions to private, or we're doing partial conversions where people are sort of rebasing their NHS contracts, or at least trying to, and sort of do a bit of both really. So we're just trying to navigate that difficult phase for practices at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of associates that are questioning how viable it is to work within the NHS, and owners. So yeah, it's really moving quickly, and there's a lot of stories out there. So at the moment, I would say, I don't know. We're just like everyone else. We're constantly watching and waiting to see what happens next.
And what impact is this having on patient mindsets? I know we just spoke about how it's impacting practice teams, but what impact is it having on patients specifically?
It's an odd one actually, because I do think that people's mindsets have changed sort of pre-COVID. I know that we always go back to that term, but it really is true. But it's not just about COVID and what happened and people's access to dental practices during that time. I think at the moment, practices are faced with doing the right thing for the patient. And the patients are sort of a little bit more accepting that it's quite difficult for them to get that right all the time. There is a problem with access. There's always been a problem with access, I think, generally with the NHS, but there is more now because of the conversions. Patients' mindsets, it's a funny one really, because they're almost accepting the fate, a lot of them. Obviously some can't afford to accept that fate, Gabby, and there is a place for people that are really going to need access to that NHS care for a long time to come. And it wasn't that long that I was sort of managing NHS contracts, and I think doing quite a good job of it. I think we had a good balance of keeping the patients happy and comfortable, and the ability to get in when they needed to be seen, whilst looking at alternatives for us as a group as well. But I do think that's changed. I do think as a business owner they've had to sort of make quicker decisions. But then the mindsets of patients, I do feel that, you're definitely not, there isn't an open door. Patients are accepting of the current situation, and there's a lot of people very unhappy. But I would say that patients are a little bit more understanding that it is difficult. They know the wait is going to be a lot longer to be seen on the NHS. If practices are doing some kind of conversion or working more independently away from the NHS, patients are more open-minded to that. And accept that things may change.
Yeah. There is a lot of what you've just said that I feel we have spoken about before, and it feels like it's kind of really coming to fruition now.
Yeah.
You said partial conversion and full conversion. So, can a practice negotiate contracts? Kind of, how does this work exactly?
That's the big question, Gabby. Everyone asks me that. So if I wanted to read my contract, if I wanted to approach the what used to be the LATs, now it's called the Integrated Care Board, is it? ICBs? That's the one.
I'm nodding, but I don't want to nod and get it wrong.
My age now, but yeah, it's ICBs now. That's it. They just like to throw us now and again, but it's really, really different in whichever area that you live in, and where you practice and where your contracts, postcoded, because we've seen a lot of people that have been able to approach their local area team, and it's been negotiated really quickly. And yes, how many UDAs would you like to keep? and it's just been a conversation and then obviously a signed document, and that's gone forward. So that's been brilliant because they've been able to sort of manoeuvre into the private sector the pace they want, and they've been able to keep the NHS contract for the patients that are really in need of that service, and that's been really good to see. However, of late we have had some sort of areas that have been almost, no, you need to do the whole amount of the contract and deliver all of that or none at all, which is quite scary because then it really takes that decision out of your hands and you have to sort of act quickly. I would say that I feel at the moment that the ICBs are listening, and I think they understand the pressures that we're all under. They understand that they've got a job, to solve, about access and getting people seen. But also they understand that, practices are just not financially viable to sustain just working with that contract alone. So I would say it's definitely an option. It is happening. There is people that are managing to do that, but there is a lot of practices that aren't getting that opportunity. And then obviously you've got some people that just don't want to blend the two and are going fully private. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility that you can do the both still.
Yeah. There's a lot of conversations at the moment about the viability, I think, of NHS dentistry, with the workforce plan that was released a few weeks ago, and then the recommendations from the Health and Social Care Committee that came out a couple of weeks ago about how things can change. I think a lot of people have, they say it sounds great, but they don't want to sort of accept it until they actually see some change.
I'd love to say there's going to be, Gabby, and I'm sure there will be in time, but it depends at what pace that goes at. It's like anything, isn't it? People have been waiting around, dentists have been waiting probably since 2006, I think, when the UDA contract came into place for some change that was more aligned with, the best for the patient's interest and for the practice viability. And I think, we've had a few tweaks around the edges of late, and I think that's probably helped a little. But I don't think it's the final thing that is going to result in people not probably looking at alternatives for their business. And the select committee, I think it was last Thursday only, Gabby, that sort of the read of it was a little bit deja vu. If I'm honest, I'd heard some of it before, and it was sort of, and it sounds great. And I think the workforce issue is something else that's just now thrown into the mix that overcomplicates the problem. And it's an uphill struggle, isn't it? And I can see why someone's not got the perfect answer, but on paper when you read it and some of the recommendations, you think, well, actually, if some of that happened, then I think there is a place for NHS dentistry, and actually it could work quite well.
Yeah, definitely. It's just about making it work for people and making people feel incentivized to stay in NHS dentistry and actually feel that they can provide the right care without compromising their own sanity, I think.
Yeah.
So it is a constant battle, but you're right, deja vu is a very good word for it. I feel like a lot of the press releases I read, a lot of the arguments, a lot of the things I hear people say, I feel like it's just on repeat. It's like a cycle since I started this job, which is, really sad.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it has to be the end of dentistry completely, does it? There are answers, and there's ways to kind of strike that balance.
No, honestly, Gabby, I've got some very good friends that own and work in NHS practice, and they plan to do so for a long time, until it's, I suppose, impossible really. But yes, they're still waiting for some more optimistic news of what can come in the future. So I think there'll always be people that want to work in the NHS. And that's not discrediting people that want to go into the private sector. I think it's what's right for you, and what you want to do going forward with your career, and where you sit comfortably with that. And I think actually, if we get a move on, I think that we can actually save some of that leakage and actually find a place that will suit the patients that really need that NHS care, and then obviously patients that can support themselves with the private dentistry. So I think it's just making that all come together, and it's a huge job, I'm sure, but I'm sure in all of the stuff that we've read, whether it's a document from years ago that is like deja vu, Gabby, or one that's been rewritten, or that's resurfaced recently, I think we have the solution almost, as in on paper. We sort of know what we want to do. I think it's just going to take a very brave person to actually make those decisions and make it happen, and obviously finance will always play a massive part in that, won't it?
Money always does, and like you say, I don't envy the person who has to make those decisions, if I'm honest, so glad it's not me.
Yeah, we can all sit here, can't we, and what so
Yeah,
do and what we would say and what we'd start with first. But like with anything, it is difficult. But there has to be a starting point. I think that's the thing. It's almost like we need to see that sort of chink of light.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you've described the climate very well there and very accurately. And I think you mentioned that some people will be making that move to private, which will be right for them as people and as businesses. So, I mean, have you got any examples of successful conversions, or perhaps some that may resonate with the people watching?
Yeah, we've got, I mean, Gabby, I could be here all day, but I won't keep you too long. But yeah, I mean, success, how do you measure success? That's a really big question, actually, whatever line of work you work in. But I think with the conversion, it's obviously that patients are accepting, we get enough patients to sign over to the practice privately to continue providing the standard of care that you want to deliver. So yeah, I mean, we've got some interesting ones. I think we've got some unusual ones where, have surprised us, where the one I'm thinking of mainly that has surprised us all was a guy that bought a couple of practices pre-COVID, not far before COVID, and he was presented soon afterwards with a practice that hardly had any associates that wanted to stay. And two very big NHS contracts to fulfil. So his conversion was driven by the associates, or the lack of, and the recruitment crisis. And he determined that if he went private, he could recruit more people into that practice, and his recruitment issues wouldn't be as stark. Also, we've got no alternative. If he didn't do that, he'd really got no business. So he went ahead with the conversion, and I think we mailed. Don't quote me on this, but I'm thinking about 17,000 patients. It was a huge mailing, but I think up to now we've got 7,000 patients on plan. So it's really turned his business around, and there was a lot on the line, whether it was his livelihood, just everything really. So that was a really success, because obviously he didn't have a business, and then now he has. And we've got some really big conversions happening, and we're managing to sign patients up to plan very, very quickly, because I say people's mindset is quite open to that. So yeah, I mean, the successful thing is the fact that we get them into a place where they're comfortable, they're financially viable, they're doing the dentistry that they want, and ultimately the patients are happy that they've got a secure place to come and be treated. There's always the downside, Gabby, that you've got people that just can't afford private dentistry. And it's just not in their priority list, or or feasible for them. And that's the only negative really in what we do here, I think. But like I say, hopefully if the select committee can push all that through next week, ideally, there'll be a place for everybody. But
I agree. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm aware of time, so let's nice and quickly, what would your bit of advice be for those who are watching who may be wondering how to begin their journey?
I've always said just speak to somebody that can help you with those decisions, or at least explore what's in your head and what's the possible. I think until you know what's the possible and what's your alternatives, or how it could looking at whether it's partial conversion or full conversion, you just know what's available to you. Look at the numbers, let's do the maths, let's just do some risk assessments, because it's not in our interest to take you through something that may not be successful. Know what is possible. Challenge yourself and challenge us with some of those conundrums that you may have. Don't sit there worrying and having to think it through all yourself. There is people out there, so I would just say just reach out, speak to somebody, and hopefully some of those sort of wondering about all those things in your head that go round and round, we might be able to sort of solve a few of them.
Zoe, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Gabby.